What's up, you guys? Roman wasn't built in a day here. I wanted to give you guys some tips real quick. Actually, it's just one tip on how to be a good videographer. I'll be dropping another video on how to be a great videographer, but how to be a good videographer. And I would consider myself maybe a great videographer. The first and foremost thing is just knowing how to use your tool, knowing how to use your camera. It's like super windy right now. I'm gonna actually just kind of like, wait, no, don't stop recording. You wanna make sure you understand your exposure triangle, which is shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. All of these different things, these different settings, they all affect each other. So they affect your exposure, how bright or dark they affect your exposure, how bright or dark your image is. And ISO, what that is, guys, I'm not the most fucking technical person in the world. Like, I care about what I care about. I care about telling my story, and that's all I care about, you know what I'm saying? So if you're gonna like hate and drop some like stupid tech comments, like I don't care. I just want to let you know I don't give a shit. So first, ISO is just artificial light. It's your camera creating more light to make the image brighter. The only drawback with this is as you go higher in ISO, you add grain to your image, like staticky, grainy. I know you guys have all seen footage at nighttime, or like you guys have shot a concert and you're like, oh shit, my footage is shitty now. And this is more of a problem on a crop frame sensor, like on the M50. I really wouldn't like to push my ISO up higher than like 5, 640, 800 if I really had to. For video. For photos, you can kind of push it a little bit and work with it a little bit more, especially if you're shooting raw. But for video, you know, it's awesome. I love having this EOS R. It's a full frame camera and it lets a lot more light in, so I can really push, I can really push the ISO like as high as I really ever need it to be. I haven't had any problem with having too much grain, and I always make sure to have lights as well. So ISO, artificial light that your camera creates to make your image brighter, that is ISO. Okay, next is aperture. Now aperture, Tina, can you help me out here real quick? You know where the aperture button is on the LCD screen right there? Is where it says 2.8. So aperture is basically depth of field. Right now I have the camera at the lowest aperture it can be, which is at 2.8. This makes it so that, you know, you can see my face, I'm in focus, but the mountains are blurry. If I hop out of the frame, the autofocus will automatically focus on the mountains. I hop back in the frame, now it's focusing on me. So now Tina, can you go ahead and slowly move the dial from 2.8 and move it up higher in number? So as I go up to 2.8, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to 11, the image gets darker. What also happens is everything is in frame. So Tina, can you go ahead and bump the aperture all the way up as high as it can go? All the way up to 11. The screen's gonna get dark, right? Now start hitting the ISO. ISO is gonna go up 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, right?
1,000.
1,000. Can you bump it up until you can see me?
1,000.
1,000. So at 1,000, perfectly awesome image quality. Everything is in focus from the mountains to me. That's aperture. Go ahead and drop it back. ISO 100, 2.8. So now coming back down, coming down, coming down, coming down. Car passing by, passing by, passing by. We're back?
We're back.
Okay, so we're back now at 2.8 aperture with the ISO as low as it can go. I always want the ISO as low as it can go. I generally always shoot with the aperture as wide open or as low as it can go as well. I just always have. As soon as I got my first nifty 50, my first, you know, lens after the kit lens, the old school 18 to 55, 3.5 to 5.6. I had that for like a year or two, and then I got the nifty 50, right? It's in the bio. Most affordable lens you can get for a Canon EF mount or EFS mount. Love it. Goes down to 1.8, and I was just shooting everything in 1.8. Always manual focus for years, and that's just how I got really good at being able to keep that focus. I would definitely recommend you do that to play with your aperture and to understand what these different things do. So when you lower the aperture, obviously it gets brighter. You bring it up, you narrow it, it gets darker. So that is ISO and aperture. Drop any questions below if you have any questions about that. And lastly is shutter speed. This one is like kind of a little bit harder. I think it took me a little bit more time to comprehend. When you're shooting video, most cameras have different frame rate options, whether it's 24 FPS, 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second. What that is, what video is, why they call it moving pictures or motion pictures, is it's a bunch of sequential pictures taken right after another. So you're shooting 25 frames per second. That is 24 pictures or frames within each second of video that you're shooting. So that's what video is, and the resolution at 1080p or 4K, that is how many pixels are inside each of those pictures or frames. Right now I have the shutter blasted all the way up because I don't have a filter to filter in the light, so I have to bump it up in order to get the settings I want, which are the lowest ISO and the widest aperture. I have to bump up my shutter, and the shutter is at what, 1,000?
2,000.
2,000. Shutter's at 2,000. It goes all the way up to 4,000. But I'm shooting in 4K 24 frames per second right now. At the minimum, if I don't want any like motion blur, I want my my shutter speed to be twice my frame rate. So if I'm shooting in 24 FPS, I want my shutter speed to be at 48 or as close to it. So I would want my shutter speed to be at 50. Right now, kind of moving my arms. Let's go ahead and bump the aperture up to like 10.
The f-stop?
The f-stop, yeah. Okay, yeah, now bump the shutter speed down. So now we have a higher aperture and we're bumping the shutter speed down to let more light into the frame. So go as far down as you need to get light in, or go all the way down to 50 if it's not too bright.
Too bright.
Okay, turn the aperture all the way as narrow as it could go, then as high as it can go.
Aperture?
F-stop.
So you want me to be at 50?
If possible, we gotta see if it's possible.
And then f-stop go higher?
As high as it can go.
22.
Okay. Oh, damn! I said 11. It goes to 22. Okay, so now we got a 50 shutter speed, which is twice the 24 FPS frame rate. By the way, the reason why 24 FPS is what I shoot in, what most cinematographers shoot in, like the original like film frames per second, like OG, and it's the closest to it's the closest to the speed of which our eyes process. So that's why when you watch something in 60p that's exported in 60 frames per second, it looks kind of fast, you know, and choppy, you know, or 30 frames per second. It looks like it's just moving faster than how we normally process it. So 24 frames per second is your best bet for cinematic footage. So when I shoot in slow-mo, I slow it down to 24 frames per second and it plays cinematically perfect. So just to show you what happens when you go under that twice your frame rate shutter speed. See my hands moving around. Go ahead and drop the shutter speed. It'll let a little bit more light in. Shutter, yeah.
So which one is that?
It's the one to the far right. Yeah.
The ISO?
Nope. Okay, far left. It's the shutter speed. The
50.
one over the fraction.
The f-stop?
Nope. F-stop is a decimal.
Oh, this is, okay. So I'm putting it higher?
Nope, you're gonna go lower.
Whoa.
So as you go lower, if you go lower than 50, you let more light in. Now you're probably seeing some motion blur between my hands, right? Now go back up to 50, shutter speed. See, now we're good. That's the simple reason why you want to keep it twice your frame rate for the most cinematic look. Now if I'm shooting something that's really like choppy, you know, I don't want to get that motion blur. I'm gonna turn my shutter up and get like a nice choppy. If maybe I have a strobe light on a music video, I'm gonna have that shutter cranked up to get like a really clean shot. So in other words, like what I was trying to say before, shutter speed is basically how fast those frames are taken. So the higher the shutter speed is, the faster the picture is taken. It's the same with photos and videos. The higher the shutter speed, the less light is let in and the faster the picture is taken. The lower the shutter speed, the more light is let in and the slower the picture is taken. So that's how people get, like, if you ever seen a picture over like a intersection and you see all the cars are still like blurry, it's just lights of blur. That's a long exposure picture where they set it on a tripod and they did a super long shutter speed or super low shutter speed, so it took the picture really slow and got all of that motion blur in one photo. If they were to do that without a tripod, it would just be a big fucking blur, a big mess. Turn up the shutter speed. You're gonna also have to crank the ISO because everything affects each other. That's why they call it the exposure triangle. So Appreciate you guys. Hope you got a little bit of knowledge out of this video about the exposure triangle. I highly recommend that you understand this before you go around charging people to use your equipment. My first camera, super capable camera, first shoots HD, shoots slow motion, takes like 20 megapixel photos. The T2i, man, it's 150 bucks. Go get it. If you need a camera, you need to learn this stuff, go do that shit, man. But yeah, you want to understand this, you want to get out and you want to practice. You're not going to really fully grasp this idea just by hearing this information. So you really want to go out and actually understand it by putting this stuff into action. And once you have a grasp of that, you'll be able to storytell so much better because you'll understand what you're shooting, what you need to do, what your settings need to be in order to accomplish the story that you're trying to tell. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. Hit that sub button, drop a comment, hit me up on Instagram. I will respond to you on there, every single message. And yeah, man, appreciate you. Stay creative.